Hey there guys, Velvet J here with the special edition of the RWBYcast podcast. With me today I have got Leaf as always, and as you can most likely see on your screen, I have our special guest, E.C. Myers, who I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Eugene. I write as E.C. Myers. I primarily write young adult science fiction and fantasy, but you folks probably know me best for my work with RWBY and Scholastic. And so I've got my first novel is RWBY After the Fall, Before the Dawn should be out in July. Date still to be determined. And in September, we've got the Fairy Tales of Remnant.
And that's all the RWBY stuff from you this year. Is there anything next year?
Well, that's still to be determined. If Before the Dawn sells well, there probably will be another book, hopefully. But, publishing is really in a weird place right now. I think every industry is in a weird place.
Yeah, due to the outbreak.
Yeah, so I was only contracted to do the 2 books, but I'm definitely interested in doing a third. I think Scholastic would be interested in doing another. I think that obviously the sales will probably make an argument one way or the other. But I'd be happy to do more. But yeah, that's pretty much the written RWBY work that's forthcoming.
Yeah. So how did you get involved with Mars and Carrie? Did they contact you, or did you get approached by Scholastic saying that there's this RWBY project out there? How did that go about?
Yeah, I was contacted by Scholastic. So my editor there was Chloe Fraboni. She's really the person who kind of made all of this happen. She's a huge RWBY fan, of the cosplaying variety. She's got some amazing Yang cosplay, and she was really she was working at AFK, Away from the Keyboard, which is an imprint at Scholastic. And I'm sorry, hold on one second. My son just walked in. Hold on, buddy. Speak of the devil. He's not good at following directions sometimes. Anyway, Chloe Fraboni, she worked for Away from the Keyboard, which is an imprint at Scholastic that does video games, video game.
Yeah, I believe they've done some. Yeah, I believe they've done some for Halo.
Yeah, she worked on Halo.
Questionable given the M ratings for much of the series.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, and they did Five Nights at Freddy's, things like that. So she was really interested in doing RWBY, and she reached out to Rooster Teeth, and they were interested in doing a YA series. And she found me, I believe, through another editor of hers who, she was, I think, reaching out to folks who had recommendations for people who would be good writers for RWBY. And so I was one of the authors that she contacted. She had liked my other books, and I basically auditioned for it. I believe I wrote a sample scene or something, with not that much information, just kind of like a scene that could take place at RWBY. And so I just wrote this little segment of from RWBY's perspective on a mission, and they liked it. I basically that's sort of the short version of it. I auditioned for it. They liked my work, and then we kind of went from there.
That's kind of a new one. I've never heard of auditioning for it, sort of thing. It's
It happens. It's I've done other work for hire projects. My previous 2 books, The Silence of Six, and Against All Silence, those were work for hire. So somebody else's intellectual property, but they needed an author to write the book. I auditioned for that as well. Sometimes they'll ask you for an outline. It depends on the property. Sometimes they'll ask for an outline, but they always want a sample, and that way they can kind of judge all of the authors based on their strengths, find the right voice, things like that. So it's like going for any other job. I guess it's probably, if I were a bigger name author, if it was if they were oh, we really want John Scalzi or somebody to write a RWBY book, probably they would only reach out to John Scalzi and hope that he would say yes. Because they know their work, they know the name, etc. So I think that when they were looking for kind of an unknown quantity. They have a bunch of different authors who they don't know for sure would be good for it or not, or even available. Maybe they open up the pool a little bit for that.
And you said Chloe's a major RWBY fan. How much of a RWBY fan are you?
Right now, I'm a huge RWBY fan. At the time that she approached me, I hadn't really been that aware of RWBY. Like I said, I have a 5-year-old son, so from the point that he was born, a lot of my media consumption had dropped considerably, as well as my writing output. It's funny how kids have that effect on you. So I was always an old school like anime fan, in addition to being an old school Doctor Who fan. So when I found out about RWBY, I like looked into it. I was like, wow, this looks really cool. Reminded me of some of the old, almost the Magical Girl anime series, things like Sailor Moon or Magic Knight Rayearth and things like that. Just having like a team of, really cool heroines who have these special powers, who, go out and fight evil. So if you're boiling it down to like its core essence, and of course RWBY is, in anime style as well. So that spoke to me pretty well. So obviously, like before I say yes, I started watching it. And the early season, even as rough as I think the animation is, especially compared to where it is now, like the action sequences were amazing, and the story and the world were really interesting. So I was like, yeah, I'm totally interested in doing this. And then I binge watched, as much of it as I could. At the time, I think there were probably like four or five seasons of the show already for me to get through. So I watched as much as I could, because I also had to write a sample, to submit, and then I had to start outlining as well.
Right.
And all of that, it was on a very tight timeline, so I was watching it while I was also working on it. But pretty much immediately, once I found out about RWBY, of course, I was into it.
You got straight into it.
Well, I pretty much was on board from the beginning with the Red trailer, when it played after the credits for the season 10 finale of Red versus Blue.
So we've finished up Volume 7 with RWBY, and I'm guessing you've watched Volume 7 yourself, have you? I'm going to ask a cheeky question. Do you have a favourite character?
On the show?
Yeah.
I really like Penny.
Another Penny fan in the community.
Yeah, I really like Penny. I mean, like, all the characters are awesome. Obviously, I like from Team Coffee. I obviously really like Fox and Yatsu, but Penny from the current show, and I mean, I think I like most of the characters. I like Ren a lot as well, and John. They're all really good, but I think Penny I was most excited to see coming back. So.
Well, I know my mate Jay will love that, because my mate Jay's a Penny fan. So when after the fall and you got the audition, you got through that part, did Mars and Carrie sit down and talk with you and give you like a story treatment, or talk to you about where they wanted this book to go, or was it just you going for it?
Initially it was me and Chloe talking about a few different storylines, different characters, because we didn't even know necessarily who the characters would be. It wasn't set that it would be a Team Coffee book, although it was. I think that Miles and Carrie thought that was a really good idea. I think there was a push for Team Coffee, but we had a couple of other ideas that of ancillary characters that we could have worked with. Or we didn't know if it was going to be like a Team RWBY book that would somehow work into the continuity. But once we settled on, I kind of came up with a few different ideas, and then we decided to go with the Team Coffee one, and then I came up with an outline for the story, and then we were on the phone. We did a bunch of like conference calls where we talked it out. And I refined the outline. They gave me ideas. We talked about the ideas that I had. We talked about how it would fit into the story. And then, just as I was working on sort of the final outline before I started working on the book, I actually was able to go to Rooster Teeth Studios and sit in the writer's room with all of them. And we really hammered it out, because a lot of it was not just the plot, but it was also the things about the world building that I needed to understand. Like, I could understand quite a bit from watching the show and from reading the wiki, and looking online, but there were a bunch of things that I needed them to actually explain to me, or things that they wanted to correct. And then there's also elements that like in the show yet that I needed to be aware of. Like Vacuo had never been on the show yet. So when we knew that we were setting it with Team Coffee in Vacuo, I needed to know, like, what do you guys see Vacuo as? Like, I was going to flesh it out, but I wanted as much guidance as they could give me about things that they had figured out already that they just hadn't like put on the screen yet.
Right.
So yeah, but aside from all of that, so the plot and the world building were huge, but then it was also like the characters, and I wanted to make sure that all of the characters like fit, and especially like thinking of things like semblances and their backstories, and even just coming up with some of the names for some of the characters that would show up in the series. Like I had to follow the same naming conventions that I'm sure every RWBY fan fiction writer knows about, you know, in terms of like, naming the colors and everything.
It's their name evocative of a color in some way.
The good old CNR. Laid down by the original creator himself. It's a fun little notion to have with a show or a book, like having a similar set of rules laid down. And you mentioned that you had other ideas, not just like Team Coffee. What were some of those other ideas that you had? That's got me curious a little bit.
Yeah, so it was a while back. I think, I mean, obviously the big ideas were, and I don't know if we ever fleshed any of them out, but obviously there was talk of doing a Roman Torchwick book, or even, you know, or obviously everybody wants to see Team Stark, you know. So some of those ideas, like knowing these are things that, you know, the fans want to see, that also Chloe wants to see, that are things that could tie into the main story without necessarily having a major impact on ongoing events. And then, of course, Team Coffee being one of the major teams that, you know, disappeared, you know, they could go off and have adventures that aren't necessarily going to have an immediate impact on the show. So I don't think we fleshed anything out until we settled on who the characters were going to be and like what the timing of it was going to be. And then once we had Team Coffee, and then I had to figure out, like, you know, how to put them into Vacuo and how to fit that into the storyline.
So whose decision was it to have it? Because from what I can see with Art of Thought, it's between Volume 3 and just going into Volume 6. Whose idea was that? Whose decision?
I think it was just a matter of, it might have been Rooster Teeth. And I think that they were most keen on the Team Coffee, and that's probably why we landed there. But I think it was just a matter of, there was like a time jump, you know, between seasons, so that seems like a natural place to do an additional story. And then, of course, I think that since you know that if we're going to set it in Vacuo, like, we're setting up stuff that will be seen on the show later on, so it just kind of made sense to It was set to be between those two seasons, but as I was working on the book, like, one of the things that they really wanted, and I don't remember if it was Rooster Teeth or if it was Scholastic, but they also wanted Ruby to be in the book. And it's like, well, how do you get Ruby into the book? And so it may have been my suggestion to have like these flashbacks, and the flashbacks, I think, were a good way to bring Ruby in, you know, on screen. And also show a little bit more of Beacon, because that was the other thing. Like, they really wanted to show more of what school life was like, which we didn't get a lot of, even in the series.
It was the first 3 volumes, and at the end of volume 3, it got overrun. Yeah.
So it was an opportunity to show school life from like another perspective, to have them interacting with Ruby, to have Ruby on screen, to show the events of the series from a different perspective, and then also show some of the kind of immediate impact of the fall of Beacon, which we never really saw on the show, at least from Beacon, you know, at Beacon. You know, again, we had the time jump, and you have a lot of characters who are dealing with their own personal sort of fallout from the events, but you don't and you see those those shots of Beacon, you know, kind of overrun with Grimm, with the, you know, the dragon,
the wyvern,
but
the wyvern.
The wyvern, but yeah, you don't actually have anything like set there yet, and I'm not sure, you know, I'm assuming we'll get there at some point, but
yeah, most likely after the Atlas arc, where at this point we all know it's not gonna go well next volume.
I don't know why you would think that. But from other writing that I've done, like the flashback structure can help a lot as well in terms of like you were already. It made it much more natural to do flashbacks for each of the characters to show some of their backstories, and it narratively, like you see it on TV and in films all the time as well. Like narratively, thinking about something like, say, the series Lost, for instance, having that flashback structure, you can show an event in the past and then kind of show growth in the character, but then also showing how tying the two together thematically, or even bringing back like a plot point or something like that to kind of reinforce things.
Because how I saw it with like the flashbacks with Team Coffee was it wasn't just building up the world that we had in the canon of Volume 1, Volume 2 and Volume 3. It was also building upon these characters and fleshing them out further and making them a bit more like Team RWBY but in their own aspect, sort of thing. And
yeah, so it's a way to kind of still do that while still moving the story forward, which is very important.
That's the one thing that I loved. Like, it felt to me, and this was one thing I was going to ask, was Velvet the main pick for the character, like the lead character, to have in there? Like, because when we start out with Velvet more than Coco or Yadihachi or Fox. Was that a decision, or was that something that felt natural?
I think that's just how I ended up writing it. The one reason why you would probably see Coco and Velvet more often in the book is because you saw more of them on screen in the show, and they're obviously like much more popular. They honestly, like, I may have started with Velvet. In terms of outlining it, I'm trying to figure out like how I did that, but she has the hardest time settling in at Vacuo.
Yeah.
She had the hardest time leaving Beacon. So you kind of, all of the characters have some growth, but I think Velvet is the one, I think she bookends it, right? Velvet is the one who really has to kind of come to accept, what they did and where they are. Like, figure out what home means. And so she had that sort of character arc. So thinking about like outlining it that way, but it also, Velvet, like I knew her better than any of the other characters because I saw more of her. I had more to go on, with her character. Just like she's actually spoken on the show, so that helps too. It possibly I felt more comfortable that way. But yeah, it was just like a matter of it wasn't an arbitrary thing. Like I didn't just have like, okay, here's the plot points and then just kind of shuffle in characters, wherever I wanted to. Like I had to give thought to, okay, which character makes the most sense for this, their POV should be in this chapter. Is it because of something that they can do? Is it because of something that they have to learn? Things like that, like figuring out like which chapters were going to be from Fox's POV, who's very hard to write for because he can't see.
Right.
Things like that. Like I had to give a lot of thought to sort of that balancing. And then I also wanted to make sure that they all were represented and they all, that we were switching back and forth. So I think I tried to kind of follow the same pattern, like, okay, Velvet, Coco, Yatsu, Fox, or something like that. But then you might get two chapters from one character POV, or you might skip one for one of the cycles. Like it wasn't just a set formula. It was kind of more based on who was the best character to write from that perspective from.
Well, I know you did. You settled a score for me in a sense that Ozpin is basically a nutcase. He loves throwing characters off of the mountain into the forest. Bringing that back in after the fall for Team Coffee was got a laugh out of me. It's like, yep, he.
Yeah, and also in this we get how a couple of them end up finding the cave that. I believe it's Coco and Fox. They find the cave that Jean and Pyrrha would walk into later, 1 year later, and they were all like, they were thinking that only an idiot would go in there.
It's like it's nice to have those little Easter eggs in there, and that, like, knowing about Team Orban fighting a Deathstalker during the Battle of Beacon. Don't know if they survived Battle of Beacon. That's one thing I did ask you on Twitter, and you're like, maybe we'd have to see because things can change. And I know you can't say if they're going to turn up in Before the Dawn because of spoilers and that. But what sort of questions did you ask, like Mars and Carrie, when you were writing after the fall? Like,
I mean, it definitely asks about like how do you guys see Vacuo? You know, how would you describe it, or you know, and they recommended a couple of documentaries on like planet Earth, like those types of things to sort of get a sense of like the desert environment. And they would you obviously you would say like Tatooine would be like one aspect. I've got notes somewhere, you know, in one of my notebooks. I have notes from those calls, but I definitely asked them about world building. I probably had to ask clarifying questions about how, you know, semblances work. You know, I came up with the character, like their semblances and their weapon names, and I think we had to go back, and they liked the semblances. There was one note on Coco where they actually asked me to change her semblance because another character actually had the semblance that I came up with. And I won't go into any details on that, but then I was like, which character? Like, I was like, you know, talking to them is really exciting because on the one hand, I'm getting insider knowledge on some things. Like I sort of knew what was going to go down at Atlas, you know, early on. Although everyone can kind of see where things are going,
Yeah,
but
they're screwed.
but there's like a balance of like, you know, as an author, it's cool for me to know like where things are going, so I can set things up for that. But then as a fan, I don't necessarily want to be spoiled for a lot of things either. I'll say that in Before the Dawn, at one point we wanted to bring back a character that people would not be expecting, and we did throw the idea out there that maybe we could bring Penny back, and they were like, you can't bring Penny back. So, you know, it's like, you know, and then I'm like very excited to like we're going to do with that. I'm like, awesome, you know. So there's things like that are fun. But I'm glad that you guys like the little Easter eggs, because I appreciate those as a fan. I'm sure some fans thought maybe it went overboard, but I like having those callbacks. Like hopefully they don't distract from the main story, and if you miss them, you don't miss anything important. But if you watch the show, or even if you watch, like, I think I threw in some like references to like the Chibi, you know, it's just more fun, I think, for fans, hopefully, to see these like nods and things like that.
You mentioned about Coco's semblance. What was the original idea for her semblance that you gave her?
I can't tell you.
So is that
gonna
spoiler related for what's coming in the show, or it coming in the novel?
I think it'll be in the show at some point. They'll
so we'd have to keep an eye out for that one, because
yeah. Yeah, but I was really excited. I was like, this is a really cool semblance. And so then I think they gave me the idea for, because I was like, then what do you suggest like for her semblance? So we worked with her hype semblance. I think they renamed it at some point as well. But you know, but generally, you know, I think Chloe and I refined Yatsu's semblance a little bit. Fox's, I came up with that. And then Velvet, they you know, gave me more explanation for it, because based on like what I saw on the show and what I saw on the wiki, I wasn't exactly sure like what she was doing. But
how fun was it, like, because with Velvet's weapons she can make hard-like copies of everyone's weapons. How fun was it to go back and pick out weapons for her to use, because there is a different variety in there?
Yeah, it was really cool, because you didn't get to see, you know, you got to see the main character's weapons on the show. It was also really cool. I'm not sure if I do it in After the Fall so much, but definitely Before the Dawn, she'll use weapons that you haven't seen from characters you haven't seen. You know, but it was really cool, and it was also really nice to have like that moment where, as I realized, so the thing with her camera with Inessadora is, when she uses a photograph, it's gone. And so it was really nice to have that knowledge. So then when I'm writing the scene and she's like, okay, if I use this picture of Ruby, it's gone. You know, I don't, and I'm also like, you know, using up a really powerful weapon that I should probably save for later, because I may never get that again. You know, so part of it is like the emotional link to the person in the photograph. These are her friends. But then it's also like, that's a really cool weapon. I should probably save that for an emergency. You know, so how that balance. So in my head, and I don't know if this is ever, this may not necessarily be like explicit in either of the books, but she'd have tons of photos of her own teammates and her classmates at like Vacuo, for instance, because those are renewable resources. Like you can take as many pictures of Coco with her gun as you need to, because you can just get another one, another time. So she'll lean on those weapons more than she would on, like if she got a picture of like Ozpin's weapon or something like that, know.
It'd be interesting to see if she does get Ozpin's weapon, because that's one of the one of the weapons.
I could easily see her taking a photograph of Ozpin and him looking at her, and then her just very quietly deleting it. Like, there's something I could see something like that going down. There have to be people who know what her weapon and her semblance are. Yeah. So she'd have to be sneakier about it. But, for the most part, for nobody at Beacon up until the fall of Beacon knew what she was doing, so, and for all they know, like, she's taking pictures for the yearbook. Yeah, right?
But then you see, like, in Volume 3, when she's showing Ruby, it's got a picture of Sun's weapon, but it's also got Sun's arse in the shot. And when I first showed my mate Volume 3, he turned around and asked me, does Velvet have an arse fetish? And I just kept laughing, like, that's one of the most random things to come out with. But then when you see Velvet just gets permission from Coco to go kick some mech ass, and you see her bringing out all these weapons, it's like, oh, so that's why Coco doesn't want her to use her weapon too much.
We also don't know if Velvet's actually a good photographer. It's just like she's just trying to get the weapon in the shot.
Yeah.
Right.
So.
And it makes me wonder, because like some of the forms that she had in the show, like Mirtmaster, was actually in its holstered form. So it makes me wonder, like, if like you're going to do that at some point in Before the Dawn, and that whether she's going to have the holstered versions, or are they going to be just fully active versions? Because people do holster their weapons a lot, and you can't get the full picture of it. Like with Crescent Rose, it's always folded up on Ruby's back, unless Ruby has her scythe out. So,
well, I mean, it's really interesting because it's like the I don't want to go down that, excuse the term, rabbit hole of describing the technology, the way the technology would work, but it's also like she's got a 2D photograph, right? Of people. It's like in one plane, but she has a 3-dimensional rendition of whatever that weapon is. So there has to be some aspect in which it's actually scanning the weapon, because it also like can kind of like, because I start thinking about like how does she use like an energy weapon, with like a hologram, a hard light representation of it, things like that. Like you can go really. There's like a certain point where you just need to be like, look, it's magic, or it's just let it go, right? But those are the questions that keep me like at the keyboard, like, how does this work? Or I have to send an email off to like Eddie or somebody and say like, I need an explanation.
It makes your head scratch when you think about it too much, like with like the main story of the relics, which is what I'm glad didn't turn up in After the Fall, the relics. Because like I know like a few people in the Wikia server were worried about After the Fall being getting the Relic of Destruction or the Summer Maiden, but it had its own cohesive story that's separate from the main story, and bringing in a new bad guy like the Crown and Carmine and Bertolac.
I think I could say like, so I can talk about this. Like the outline went through a bunch of revisions, and we had conversations, and I'll say that there was a draft, or at least an idea that I had, where I thought about putting the Summer Maiden into a scene, and it would have been with when Fox was fighting in the desert. I was going to have him saved by like somebody comes and saves him, and he knows it's like a woman or something, but he obviously can't see them. So it was a way to have the Summer Maiden on the page, but not have them exposed, like, because he doesn't even know what a Summer Maiden is, of course, and then he wouldn't have to describe them or anything like that. And so, but that would have been too distracting, and so it wasn't necessary. Like, there's like a you can't have too much fan service, or you could put too many things like that in there. But it was an idea.
Yeah, though you would at least be able to squeeze in Team Sun at the end, where with their introduction, which was nicely set up by the start of Volume 6.
Was that planned, or was that put in last minute?
That wasn't put in last minute. I'm trying to remember when they came into it, but they definitely wanted them to show up.
So we got the we've got the Coffee Sun team up, the Sun Coffee team up, and like bugger, I forgot what I was going to say now. Leaf, have you got any questions, mate?
Yeah, I got. Well, there are plenty of additional. Well, when it comes to the net, obviously obviously we get a lot of this book manages to stay separate from the main plot, but it does manage to, though of course this definitely manages to nicely add on to and onto what's going on in the for instance, the back in volume 2 they had that mission, Team Coffee off on a mission.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like how they managed to explain what was going on there.
Yeah, thank you.
The good instance of death that is needed in RWBY with the Grimm, in my opinion. Having the Grimm actually killing someone, even if it's in novel form, works with the Grimm. We haven't seen Grimm actually properly killing people since volume 3, I think.
Yeah, like with Torchwick getting eaten back then by a griffin.
Yeah, I think that the Fall of Beacon, you're following the main characters. Like, there's all sorts of mayhem going on in the background, and I think the assumption is that a lot of people die.
Yeah.
But obviously, you're following your main characters, and they're going to come through it mostly unscathed, at least physically. But yeah, that scene tying into Volume 2, like, it was really. I basically went into this thinking, okay, well, I want to make sure that I'm not contradicting anything that has happened in the show proper. And
of course,
there were few enough glimpses of Team Coffee in the first 3 volumes that I went to those as obvious points to kind of expand upon or acknowledge in some way, which is why we have them at the setting up for the dance. Which so anytime Coffee was mentioned, that was something that I could use to try to imagine like what they were actually doing, while all these other events were happening. And then I thought that was also like just a good way to tie characters, the main RWBY characters into it and do those flashbacks.
And I mean, what was it like? How did you go about like bringing Carmine, Bertolac, and the Crown into it as the main villains? Because we know we got art for Carmine. Was there concept art done for Bertolac and the Crown, or was it just Carmine that got it for Amity Arena?
That came about for Amity Arena. I didn't know that they were going to do that. I think I've said this before. I think if I'd known that they were going to basically draw the character, I might have described her a little bit differently in the book. But I know there's like some people really love it. Some people are just kind of like, I don't know about this. It worked on the page, I thought, but so the basic consensus was that we didn't want this to be at least the big bads. The main antagonist should not be anyone from the series. At least as far as you can tell, right?
Right.
So I had to come up with new characters, and I basically came up with the idea of the semblance causing Grimm to, it's like basically attracting Grimm, and then I think from there we kind of went into like being able to manipulate emotions, and so then that obviously would kind of attract the Grimm. But then that has like a good side and a bad side as well. And then as we were working on that, then we sort of was working with Yatsu's semblance, thinking about how those two tie together. And so this is where having a great editor and a great collaborative writing team, like the folks at Rooster Teeth, is great, because you can have an idea and then you just kind of keep like iterating on and discussing it until you end up with like the final product. But basically the idea was, having this semblance be something dangerous, and then the idea that somebody would be collecting people who have powerful semblances, because that seems like something that would probably happen in a world like this. And then I thought, he'd have his grandfather there, and you would have the sort of the fake out. Hopefully it's a fake out where they think that he's the one with the powerful semblance, but it's actually his grandson, and he's been masking it, but inconsistently, so trying to create a mystery. So trying to create a mystery around it, so that at least there are some like twists and turns and things in it. And in terms of thinking of the bad guys, I came up with Carmine and Bertilac, and I just sort of, people have asked like, oh, is the Arthurian, is there any meaning behind the the fact that it's like an Arthurian, they're based on like Arthurian characters, like, knights and things like that. And from my perspective, like a lot of the characters in RWBY have been based on fairy tales and mythology and stories like that. And the Arthurian tales hadn't been used too much. And so I've always really liked them. So I kind of went with that motif, and it doesn't necessarily mean anything officially, but or maybe unofficially it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but thinking about the colors and like the Green Knight, and then having like a Red Knight and things like that.
I like how you say that officially, unofficially, because the minute people hear that, they're going to most likely jump onto that, try and find out if it links.
I've been on the wiki, I've been on Reddit. I know how things can get twisted and how people latch onto things. Yeah, so
it's kind of like the theory that's going around at the moment. Mainly, I'm partly responsible for starting it a bit, but the crown could be linked to Glinda Theory.
I think I heard that one.
Whether or not that's going to turn out true or not, who knows? You have to watch. I was going to say watch the show, but read the book. Read the book. Pick up after the fall and pick up before the dawn. And I think Leaf.
Well, I mean, I think the challenge is that there are icons in the series. There's the relics, and then there's obviously it's her cape and things like that. And so if you evoke one of those things, there's always the possibility that people will see links, and there may or may not actually be any links there. But you only have the source material to go on, and at the moment the source material is the show and the books and some of the comics, right? And the game. So like there's so little information, it's really easy to just kind of like take these things and pull them together. And it's entirely possible, like I don't know everything that's going to happen on the show, or even in the next book, like if we do another book. But the thing is, like those links may not exist when when they're put there, but then organically it may make sense to create those links, or the story is subconsciously being guided in that direction or whatever. Like there are just things that you go in planning it, and then there are things that come about because of happenstance or luck, and hopefully if you do your job right at the end of the day, it looks like you were brilliant and you planned it all from the start and you're a master storyteller. But a lot of things happen in revision, and the author seeing links that they didn't necessarily have in mind when they were writing it, but when you see it on the page, it's like, oh, there's this really interesting kind of common through line here. I should emphasize that, and then that can make the story more meaningful because it gives the characters a theme or a character arc. And again, then you start planting more of those things so that it seems like it was intentional. So that they are now intentional, but the end product, that may not have been your first draft idea, or even what the outline said, or whatever.
Speaking of like drafts and that, we got mentions of Shade Academy. Was there any intention of showing a Shade Academy in After the Fall, or even in Before the Dawn, or is that something that's going to wait till the show?
You will see Shade Academy in Before the Dawn. There was no, I don't think there was any discussion about showing Shade or not showing Shade because of the way that we constructed the plot. We didn't need to show Shade. Like I probably could have done a flashback or something at Shade, like when they arrived or something like that, but I didn't need it. Like they were out in the desert. Like that was the whole story. So actually, bringing them into the school didn't seem necessary. Yeah. But yeah, there's actually quite a bit of the book is set at Shade Academy.
So with Shade Academy coming into Before the Dawn, are we going to get some more like professors and teachers? Just because we had Professor Rumpel, clearly Rumpelstiltskin, nice little nod there, and we had Theodore, who I believe is part of Ozpin's group, because Theodore sounds like the headmaster, if I remember correctly.
Theodore.
So he's in that little Ozluminati sort of circle. So that's going to be interesting to see that character brought into the main show, given that you've brought Theodore into it first, in my opinion, with After the Fall. He was mentioning that.
Yeah, that's really exciting. Like, it's so the fact that After the Fall took place, basically off screen, between events and out in Vacuo in like an entirely new area. It was both. It was really freeing in some ways because I could create a lot that wasn't there before, but I also had the world building. I had the established rules and everything, so I had a structure to work in. But it was also a little bit tense making. I was a little bit anxious as well because like I'm creating things that are going to become canon, that already are canon, that are going to eventually be seen on the show in some form or another. And so there's a lot of responsibility there. And obviously there's, Miles and Carrie and Eddie, like the whole team at Rooster Teeth that are, vetting everything and also like informing what happens on the page. But I'm still like, this is still, the introduction for those things. And so it's also like really an honor to be able to contribute to the series in that way. And really, really cool. Like I'm really kind of surprised that I was able to introduce Headmaster Theodore first in name and then on the page in Before the Dawn. Because that's like a major character, a huge part of the series. And, I think there's a lot of anticipation and interest in theories and all sorts of stuff like that. So I was a little bit nervous, but so at least for Before the Dawn, I was asking them a lot of questions about like, how do you see Theodore? How should I describe him? Things like that. And I'm actually not even sure where the final description landed, because at a certain point I did deliver the manuscript that's accepted, and then they can still kind of tweak things after the fact, and I may not have seen those final adjustments. So I'm not sure like where that ended up. There were still a couple questions that I had, but I think that they were planning to match it up more with like their vision of the character at some point.
Because characters can like change their appearance, like cut their hair, change their clothes, dye their hair, that sort of thing. So it can change when it comes to seeing him in the main show. And I believe we can get on to the fan questions as we are at the 42-minute marker, and we've only got an hour with you, as you did say. I do know Leaf has got a question about gunpowder in his little armament.
It's a loaded question. One, as far as you can tell, does gunpowder exist on Revenant? And if so, two, how effective would gunpowder-based ammo be compared to dust rounds?
As far as I know, I don't believe they have gunpowder, because gunpowder is a combustible, combustible. They don't even have gasoline or anything. Like everything is dust-based. So I'm pretty sure that everything's going to be like a dust round.
So if there were, how effective would you say they would be?
I mean, I guess it would probably, it's an interesting question. Like I could be completely speaking out of turn. So anything that Rooster Teeth says will obviously, replace whatever I say officially. But it could be interesting. I could see people cutting dust with something else. So you can kind of keep some of the impact of it, but kind of use it more sparingly, I guess. Because even gunpowder is like a mixture of different things.
Right.
I mean, I guess it's probably comparable. I'd probably say that like your generic like dust rounds are going to be about the same as like gunpowder, right? Just because it's like it only needs to be as effective to like get the job done or whatever.
Right. Next, all the Grimm introduced in After the Fall, which one would you say is your favorite?
Of the Grimm introduced in After the Fall, the Dromedons. I just love the idea of these like evil freaking camels that spit poison.
My pick would be the blind worms, and it's probably because of Gears of War 2. Where where the locusts basically had a giant worm, known as a ripworm, sinking cities. And at one point, the protagonists end up getting eaten by that thing, and they kill it, but by way of chainsawing its heart, its arteries and veins up, and then cut their way out.
Yeah, the coming up with the creatures for Vacuo was a lot of fun.
I mean, my favourite one at the moment from Afterthought is the Jackalope, mainly because there's no concept art around it. It's meant to be a rabbit grim, and it's a challenge for me to take the Jackalope and turn Velvet into it in my fanfiction series. Literally,
it's more of it's something of a horror story that Velvet's doing.
Becoming the enemy is basically Salem has found a way to turn people into Grimm through a Grimm that she's invented using the Relic of Creation to help her as well. So it's kind of got that horror-esque feel to it, because I definitely go into the body horror aspect of it.
Right.
So,
wow. Yeah. Fun bit of trivia on the Grimm. So the Ravagers, I originally called them. So sometimes the series also has like references to children's literature and books, other stories. Right. And so when I came up with the Ravagers, my original name for them was the Camazotz, which, if you've read or seen A Wrinkle in Time, is like the like creepy planet that they end up on. But Camazotz is also like a bat god, I believe, of death or something like that. So I was going to name it that, but like nobody got the reference, so I just changed it to Ravagers.
Yeah.
Like, all right, that's fine.
And my last question would be that if you were a huntsman, what would your weapon or weapons be?
Oh, it's a good question. I probably would go pretty basic, like John, and I'd have a sword, I think. Yeah. It's hard not to look cool swinging a sword.
Yeah, I can agree with
somehow
that.
John manages it early on, but...
So our first fan question comes from Mbar. This was a recent one. I've just bunged it on the top of the list, so I'm doing this in no particular order. But she's asked if EC has read any reviews for After the Fall and taken their critiques or reviews into account for the new book.
I will say this: I have read. I think I've read every After the Fall review that I'm aware of, but not in. But I don't think I've taken anything from them that I've applied to the sequel. Some authors won't read reviews, good ones or bad ones. I like reading them all. Just the fact that anyone is reading my work and taking the time to respond to it is pretty satisfying and gratifying to me. And sometimes I can take some criticism. I'll say for like my first novel, I read a review that criticized something that I thought was clear in the book, and it wasn't, and I had enough time to actually retcon it for the sequel, or at least I could explain it a little bit better. So I totally did that, and I'm not opposed to taking some of that sort of feedback. But there wasn't anything. I don't think I saw anything that made me like pause and say, "Oh, I should address that in the next one," or anything like that. It's also that as those reviews are coming in, I mean, I was already working on the book, as the first book was coming out. So I don't think I took anything from any reviews that I saw.
Interesting. Right, where's the next fan question? It's from Nodin, who is a good guy in the Wikia. He says, "Hi, is there any chance we'll learn more about Carmine in the upcoming novel?"
I don't think you'll learn more about Carmine. Not much more about Carmine. You'll learn a little bit more about Carmine.
Not much, because does that mean like she's not going to be relevant anymore going forward, or can't you say?
I don't know how much I want to say. She is a presence in the next book, but she's not a. It's
going to be really minor.
I just don't think that you're going to learn. It's not like you're going to get like her whole backstory or anything like that. If that's like what you're hoping for, I think so. She is in the next book, but you don't really spend a lot of time with her, I guess.
Our next question comes from Mona. This one I marked as a possible spoiler because I'm not sure if you could answer this one, but she asks if you can give us some hints about Sun or Team Sun's role in the new book.
They are major characters in the next book. They're on the cover, so I can definitely say they are POV characters. Every member of Team Sun has at least one POV chapter. You will see some of their backstory, and you'll get some more information about. Well, I guess some of the information about their weapons and things were in that companion book, but. They're basically sharing the limelight with Team Coffee in the next
so they're the Team Juniper of the book.
If you want to say it that way, sure.
I've got an interesting question here from Phoenix Knight, the legendary YouTuber Phoenix Knight. It's actually two questions. Who was your favourite character to write for in Team Coffee for After the Fall? And who was your favourite character to write for in Team Sun for the Before the Dawn?
I guess I'll say for Team Coffee, I think it was probably the most fun to write Fox, and I think you can probably tell. It was also like it was a character like almost nothing about him, and he's really interesting and ended up becoming like kind of really really important, I think, in After the Fall. So I had a lot of fun with him. And then I think for Before the Dawn, I think the most fun character I had writing was Neptune. And it's just like the goofier characters more, or the characters. I don't know. I'm not sure what it is, but I just had more fun with them.
See, Neptune and Fox seem more like the comedy-based characters, in my opinion. So maybe it's because you like enjoying writing comedy or writing comical characters. Maybe you don't.
I guess. I mean, I think they were just fun to write, and comedy is really hard. So I'll say this: like one of my favorite notes to get is when I write something, and it's a line or it's like a plot point or something, and like Miles will just like write a note like that is so awesome, or or just like fuck yeah or something like that, and he just his notes, when I can surprise those guys, or they are really like tickled by something that I wrote, or just think that there's like a really cool like twist or something like that, those are my favorite moments in terms of like editorial notes from the Rooster Teeth team, because like I admire their work so much, and I feel like it's got to be hard. It's like they're sort of like the maybe the harshest critics, beyond the fandom, and that this is like their work to protect and to make sure that's being represented. And so the fact that they like welcomed me into the fold essentially, and made me part of the world is really, it's a real honor and a privilege, and also a responsibility, so I just like those moments. And I think, and the reason I mention is because I think there was like one of those notes for like a Neptune scene that I wrote where they were just like, he was just like cracking up about something that I wrote, and I was like, that's really cool.
Well, Kerry is the main VA for Neptune, so if he's cracking up or enjoying what you're writing about Neptune, then I think you're in pretty solid there.
Yeah, totally.
So what the next? I've got 7 questions here from a Rusty. I can't pronounce his last name because I'm not even going to try and butcher it. One of the questions we've already covered about the weapon names and the semblances and that with Team Coffee, but he asks about, the first one is, your novel brought in new characters such as Carmine, Bertolak, the Caspians, as well as minor characters like Iris, Vega, Ash, the Grey family. Did you have any... He was wondering... Oh my god, was wondering, did you give these characters the names, or were they provided to you?
I gave the characters the names. Pretty sure, yeah. It's funny because I was telling the guys, like, one of the hardest things for me was coming up with the names, like following the name constraints and following the guidelines. And they were saying that they love that part of it. Like that's one of their favorite parts of it, because I think they just like, throwing the names around. But like I'm sitting at home, like doing it on my own, and they're in like a writing room.
Right.
You know, but just like, and they'll probably have, you know, gotten more into the habit of it. And for me, it was like sort of this new thing. It's like I've got to figure out like colors and, you know, references and things like that. And the Caspians were, you know, obviously it's like the color, it evokes like it is a color. But then I also took it from the Prince Caspian, you know, from the Chronicles of Narnia. So I was trying to tie in like storylines and things like that, like old stories. But yeah, that was really hard for me. But I don't think they gave me any names. Like I basically would come up with a name and then I would explain where I got the name from or like why I derived it that way. And they may have offered a suggestion or tweaked like some character at some point, but for the most part, either, you know what, their names changed though. Like I know Carmen and Burlak's names were different before, but I think they just said, you know, we need different names, or maybe I came up with different names and just replaced them.
Speaking of Carmine and Bertolac, the second question that he put on here is with Bertolac's mace and Carmine's weapons, like, did they have names at all to them, or?
They are not named in the books, and so I have not given them names yet.
What would you?
I mean, maybe that's just me being lazy, but you know, I haven't given them.
What would you name them if you had that opportunity to?
I can't come up with an awesome name on the spot.
Okay.
But I'll have to give it some thought, especially if there's a third book, if they show up at it in any aspect. Did I come up with I don't think I did come up with a name for. I feel like I might have come up with a name for Carmen's, but you have me saying Carmine now. I pronounce Carmen.
Sorry, I'm British here.
That's okay. A lot of people. Part of her naming came from like thinking of like Carmen Sandiego. But also the name Carmen, especially in that spelling, is read. I don't think I gave them names, but I would probably come up with for Carmen's weapon would probably be something sort of like snake based, or you know, I might just steal from like The Hobbit or something, call it like Sting or something like that.
So we got time for just 3 more questions before our time is up, and Rusty's got another question on here. One of his favourite teams is Team Bronze. No, don't worry, it's not asking about Team Bronze are going to turn up in Before the Dawn, but he is wondering if Team Indigo is going to turn up in Before the Dawn.
I will not confirm nor deny the appearance of Team Indigo.
It's just a case of we don't know what happened to them, and I think he is excited.
Read the book
when it comes out.
Yeah.
We covered the Team Coffee question of like what character did you enjoy writing the most. The final question is, you're doing the fairy tale sort of remnant book, and he wants to know, like, if you could do any book that's similar for RWBY, what would you do for it? Like, if you had free reign, would you do something like a stories from various huntsmen or huntresses, or would you do something with a different team? And like, if you got free reign to pick what you want.
Oh, if I could just do any other RWBY related book. I was thinking, I got kind of excited. I saw some fan art. I forget who drew it. Was it Aaron Wynn? Somebody did some fan art for. Sort of looked like it was Roman and it was Roman Torchwick and Neo, and I think she called it something like Partners in Crime or something like that. And that kind of sparked like an idea for a YA book that I'd love to do at some point. With like their story, you know, maybe their origin story, and it sparked like a goofy pun, call like basically like my working title for would be Roman Holiday, and kind of using it as like a basis. So I don't know. I'd love to do something like that.
I'd totally be up for it.
And we'd already have the cover art for it if we could use that fan art, because it was
I think it might have been fan art, because Partners in Crime is the name of the card for Amit Arena with Roman and Neo, so it might have been.
They may have just used the same name. I know I saved the image somewhere.
You'll have to dig it out and send it to me. Like, this is the image.
Because I mean, that could also be like a good title for it as well.
Yeah.
We haven't had any discussions about where that would go. I mean, there's so many different stories you could do. different time frames. Like I don't know where the series is going to end necessarily, but you could also do like another team in the future, depending on how things go.
Yeah, or he's like one set in the ancient past. Like during the time when magic was around, and the first generation of humanity.
Yeah,
I like think of it kind of like Knights of the Old Republic, for example, for Star Wars.
Right.
I mean,
yeah, I know everyone wants to see Team Stark. I'm pretty sure they'll deal with that.
Yeah. I mean, I can see E.C. Myers being brought onto the story group for when we go to the Vacuo arc, because he's excelled in working in the Vacuo environment with After the Fall, and I'm sure Before the Dawn's going to really build upon Vacuo a bit more. So having like you on that story group, actually writing for the show as well as doing the novels, I'd be interested to see if you do that. But would you want to do something like that?
I would love to. I know that working on a show, especially with their deadlines, is very different. Writing for television is a very different medium than writing for the page. And they trusted me to write a YA book. I trust them to write the show. But and they've got the same source material. Like they've got the 2 books for whatever source material they want to mine from that. But yeah, if they wanted me to be involved, I'd be up for it in a heartbeat. Mostly because I just love working with them. I've worked with Miles and Carrie and Eddie to some extent. I'd love to work with Kiersey. I just think that it is one of the best collaborative experiences that I've had. I've worked on a bunch of different collaborations. I've done some serialized projects with other authors. I've worked on, like I said, another IP project with another team of editors and kind of producers, and working with Rooster Teeth was a blast. So any excuse to work with them again is
Unfortunately, we're at a time, as you did say, like we have got only an hour with you. Unfortunately, that is gonna wrap this one up. I will do the outro in a minute, but I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say it or not. Can I let them know that you're coming back? Sure, so we are going to be doing a Before the Dawn Hype Train podcast for the 2nd of July, and we have got the lovely man himself coming back on for that. So if we can get him for a bit longer, I am going to arrange it beforehand, so that way we can get him for 2 hours, possibly live stream it instead of recording it, so that way people can ask questions while we're talking about Before the Dawn, and hopefully you can give us like some non-spoiler related stuff with Before the Dawn, and maybe hints for Fairy Tales of Remnant, who knows. But I would honestly like to thank you so much for coming on and doing this one, and the next one. I'll thank you in advance for the next one. But you have been...
Thank you for having me, and thank you and to all the fans for the good questions.
You've done an amazing job on After the Fall, and the guys in the RWBY community are an amazing group of people, and I am excited for Before the Dawn, because After the Fall was like a sort of breath of fresh air, adding new material to RWBY in the canon, and yeah, I'm excited to see where your career goes with RWBY, in my honest opinion.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, me too.
It was a huge relief that the book was well received, because like I said, I think I felt a lot of pressure, to do right by Monty and the writers and the show, but then also the fandom, and I know that the fandom is very discerning. So I think I said, because the book came out just before RTX last year, and I went to the convention, and the convention would have been very different if the book had not been well received. So I had a really nice time there.
Well, this was like the young adult novel, just before you go, like the young adult novel was the first of its kind in RWBY, the first canon material that we've had that's not the show, because like the manga and that isn't manga.
Aside from Grim Eclipse.
But thank you once again, E.C. Myers. Seriously, thank you for coming on, and thank you to you guys for tuning in at home. And until the next video, guys, have a safe day.